Dostoevsky's novels are filled with tormented characters, criminals, outcasts, the broken, the mad, all of them writhing in suffering. And yet, through their suffering, they often come to profound realizations about themselves, about God, and about the nature of existence. What if I told you that suffering is not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced? What if I said that your pain, your despair, your moments of complete hopelessness are not meaningless, but are, in fact, the most important parts of your existence? That's not the kind of philosophy we hear in self-help books or modern psychology, which often encourage us to rid ourselves of suffering as quickly as possible. But for Fyodor Dostoevsky, suffering is not just a part of life. It is the very crucible through which truth is revealed. Today, we will explore how suffering functions as a redemptive force in Dostoevsky's works, how it aligns with Christian existentialism, and whether, in our own lives, suffering can be a path to truth rather than just a burden to escape. For Dostoevsky, suffering is not simply physical pain or misfortune, it is existential. His characters suffer not only because of what happens to them, but because of the burden of consciousness itself. They wrestle with guilt, with moral dilemmas, with the weight of free will. Dostoevsky was, in many ways, an existentialist before existentialism formally existed. He understood that suffering forces us to confront who we truly are beneath all the illusions, distractions, and self-deceptions that we construct in everyday life. Take Notes from Underground, for example. The underground man is a person drowning in self-awareness. His suffering is entirely psychological. He is caught in a loop of self-loathing, spite, and alienation. And yet, this suffering is what makes him aware of the absurdity of his own existence. He cannot escape it, and in a strange way, he clings to it, because it is what gives his life meaning. He refuses to be like the content, unthinking masses who live without questioning their own actions. Suffering, for him, is proof of his individuality, his defiance against a world that tries to impose meaning upon him. Dostoevsky's most famous protagonist, Raskolnikov, is another character who suffers deeply, but for a different reason. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov believes himself to be above morality, above conventional notions of good and evil. He kills an old pawnbroker under the belief that he is doing something necessary, even justifiable. And yet, rather than feeling liberated, he is consumed by torment. The guilt he experiences is not merely a reaction to the crime itself, but a deeper realization that he is not the extraordinary man he thought he was. His suffering becomes a purgatory, his own mind turning against him, a relentless force that refuses to let him escape. And yet, his suffering is not meaningless. It is, ultimately, what saves him. Through suffering, Raskolnikov comes to understand the limitations of his intellect, the weight of his conscience, and ultimately, the necessity of love, humility, and faith. His redemption comes not through intellectual reasoning, but through embracing his suffering and allowing it to transform him. It is only when he stops resisting and submits to his humanity that he begins to find peace. Dostoevsky does not only show suffering as a consequence of crime or moral failure, he also shows it as an essential part of spiritual growth. In The Idiot, Prince Mishkin is a character who embodies pure goodness, yet he suffers immensely. He is ridiculed, manipulated, and treated as a fool, and yet he remains kind and compassionate. His suffering does not come from guilt, like Raskolnikov's, but from his inability to fit into a world that does not value innocence or purity. Through Mishkin, Dostoevsky suggests that suffering is not always tied to wrongdoing. It is often the result of simply existing in a broken world. Similarly, in The Brothers Karamazov, the character of Ivan Karamazov suffers not because of what he has done, but because of what he cannot accept. Ivan is tormented by the question of suffering itself. How can a just God allow innocent people to suffer? His suffering is intellectual and spiritual, tearing him apart from the inside. His younger brother, Alyosha, on the other hand, embraces suffering with faith, seeing it as a part of a larger divine mystery. Here, Dostoevsky presents two paths: rejecting suffering and falling into despair, or embracing it and finding a higher meaning. Dostoevsky's understanding of suffering is deeply rooted in Christian existentialism. Unlike the nihilists of his time, he did not believe suffering led to meaninglessness. He believed it was the doorway to revelation. This aligns closely with Christian thought, where suffering is often seen as a test, a means of purification, a path to transcendence. Christ's own suffering on the cross is the ultimate example of this, an act of unbearable torment that leads to salvation for others. Dostoevsky's characters, in their own ways, follow this path. They descend into darkness, but the possibility of redemption is always present. He does not promise that suffering will automatically bring wisdom or peace, but he does suggest that those who endure it with humility and faith may find something greater than themselves. So what does this mean for us? In the modern world, we are constantly trying to minimize suffering. We see it as something to be fixed, cured, avoided at all costs. And yet, Dostoevsky would ask, if we eliminate all suffering, do we also eliminate our capacity for deep understanding, for true self-awareness? If we avoid pain at every turn, do we also avoid the revelations that pain can bring? Perhaps the lesson Dostoevsky leaves us with is not that we should seek suffering, but that when it comes, we should not run from it. That instead of numbing ourselves, we should listen to what our suffering is telling us. That maybe, just maybe, in our lowest moments, we are closer to the truth than we ever were before. What do you think? Can suffering be meaningful, or is it simply something to be escaped? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and don't be too quick to turn away from the lessons suffering may have to teach you. Thanks for listening.